Hello, everyone, and welcome to ISACA Live. I'm Paul Phillips, the Director of Event Content Development, and I'm here today with one of our ISACA Conference Europe speakers, Richard Hollis. Welcome, Richard. We've all
Hi, Paul.
Welcome. We've all seen a series of issues regarding supply chain in the news. It has actually dominated the headlines over the past 2 years, and for good reasons. There's a lot going on across the globe. Today, we'll talk about some of the top risks and how to mitigate them, and some ways to best manage contracts as it relates to supply chain. And we'll share some findings from ISACA's recent global supply chain research. So, before we get started, Richard, why don't you introduce yourself?
Thank you, Paul. Hi. Thanks for having me. My name is Richard Hollis. I'm an information security, governance, risk, and compliance professional for some 30 odd years, which explains the white hair. I'm an ISACA member for well over 25 years. I'm a CISM. I'm a C-risk. I'm a Taurus for what it's worth. But I'm also a director of a risk management consultancy based in London. I'm going to be giving a workshop at the ISACA Europe conference this October in Rome, entitled "The Essentials of Cyber Supply Chain Risk Management." We're going to go through what is the strategy, what tools do you need, how to customize it, and how to put it together. It's an all-day workshop. Really looking forward to it, but the whole point is to come away with a process, not a product, that can help us identify, minimize, and manage the risks in our supply chain. And I'm coming to you from France. I'm in the southwest of France, and I actually work in London. So many days I wake up and don't know where I am. So if I seem a little groggy, that's not an excuse. That's just my default status.
Well, we're glad to have you, Richard. And yes, you've been around for a long time and done several workshops and sessions for us. So we're looking forward to this conversation. And then that's exactly what it is. It is a conversation. I say that because I see someone in the chat asking for materials, and there's actually no materials because this is a conversation. So if you want to get access to the materials, you have to register for the upcoming workshop that Richard mentioned. So let's just dive into it. So according to a global study conducted by ISACA this year, only 44% of respondents said they had high confidence in the security of their organization's supply chain. In today's environment, what do you think some of the top cyber risks are associated with the global supply chain, Richard?
Well, first of all, only 44% of respondents said that they had high confidence. Frankly, Paul, I'm surprised it's that high.
Yeah.
And good for them if that's the way they actually feel. My experience is something completely different. The majority of organizations that I work with have been extremely slow in understanding, much less addressing the risks the cyber risks in their supply chain. I don't know, Paul. I think there's a general failure to recognize that supplier connectivity, all right, all connectivity it presents a risk to our systems. And so I feel that in general, we as an industry have failed to recognize that supplier connectivity to our systems and product connectivity to our systems, all right, clearly presents a risk. Now, for me, the big wake-up call was, of course, the Target hack. How could you not look at Target and see an HVAC service supplier that platform was used to get access to the front tills to steal some 130 million credit cards? I mean, that was a seminal hack that clearly showed our reliance and the risks associated with our suppliers. And of course, the second one that should have been a big clarion call for all of us was the SolarWinds hack, where we are heavily reliant on a product that in fact has a backdoor because of its connectivity. All right, that's so 44% of respondents said that they have high confidence, and that to me that represents a general understanding that all connectivity that they are convinced that all connectivity throughout their supply chain has been addressed. I just don't see that. For me, when you think of the simple equation that any supplier or vendor system connected to our systems is a risk.
Yeah.
And then take that to the second degree and say that and understand that any system connected to that supplier system connected to our system is a risk. And any system connected to that system, connected to that system, connected to that system, connected to our supplier systems, connected to our system is a risk. I mean, it's that, and for anyone to feel 44% confident that they've got a handle on that kind of risks, and all the sub risks associated with all the connectivity associated with our suppliers' connectivity. For me, that's a big statement.
Yeah.
The best, Paul, for me, I keep thinking of the rock climber analogy, how rock climbers rope themselves together when they're climbing. Well, that's for safety, but there's also a huge risk. One guy goes down and he can bring down the whole slit. Everybody comes down because they're all roped together. And certainly hacking works that way. And certainly in my mind, our supply chain works that way. All right. Anybody connected to anybody can provide an attack vector to our systems. And that's what I feel in general we're not coming to terms with. And that is the problem. So anyway, to hear that 44% of respondents feel good about that, that surprises me. The other part of that question was the biggest risks. Certainly we read about ransomware, but for me, there's only one risk, and that's the risk of unauthorized access.
Yeah.
That somebody gets unauthorized access through our supply chain to our systems, and then of course that can result in a disruption of systems or data theft, data fraud, a variety of things. But it all boils down when I talk to a client, when I talk to anybody, I try to get them to focus in. Wait, it's all about unauthorized access that would allow, whether it's ransomware or whatever the attack is, to be inserted into our supply chain and cause a disruption, cause us pain and discomfort. So I think if we all focus on unauthorized access as the only risk we should be considering in our supply chains, that just helps clarify the mind and of course what's at stake for us.
Yeah. Well, Richard, after that response that you just given, I think that 44% just immediately went down dramatically. But so you and I know that as organizations that we are responsible for the confidentiality, the integrity, and the availability of the information and the systems, and the buck stops with the organization. So, what are some steps organizations can take now to identify ways to minimize those risks that you just kind of mentioned, and how to manage the threats associated with the supply chain? What are some of the things that they can do?
Well, there's a lot they can do, but for me, the first step, the baby step, is the most important, and that's, what is a supplier? And I think by defining a supplier, we start to define the problem. All right, and I understand. Everybody thinks they have a definition of a supplier, but I always advocate starting with a simple definition. Define a supplier in the chain. Okay, because this could be a partner company, it could be a subsidiary company, it could be it certainly could be a legal entity that's supplying services, but it could also be a consultant. It could be a managed service provider. It could be a product vendor with connectivity. All right, what is a supplier? I think for all of us as cyber security risk management professionals, the place to start is to sit down with procurement and come up with a mutual definition of this is a supplier in our supply chain. Because this is where I have seen organizations address supply chains. They're doing it with one definition, and their procurement department is operating on another definition. And that definition could be the length of the contract. Or we don't term anybody with less than a 1 year, a 12-month contract as a supplier. I've seen organizations. And so everybody with connectivity that has a contract to provide a service or a product, and it's less than a year, they don't register as a supplier. You see, so the first step for me is, what's a supplier? And for your risk professional and your procurement department to agree on that and stick to that. All right, once you've got that, everything for me starts to make sense in terms of, once you have a definition, then you can identify who's a supplier to that organization. According to this definition, these are the suppliers to this organization. These are the service suppliers with connectivity. These are the product suppliers with connectivity. But But starting right there, and that to me means that you've got a register of all, you've got a list, you've got a register of all the known knowns. All right, you've mapped out your real estate, about you've mapped out your supply chain and who it consists of, and what their relationship is, their specific relationship to your systems. Okay, now sorry, Paul, did you have a?
No, go ahead. This is interesting. I'm listening.
Okay, so definition first, list second. Now that you've got a list, you need to triage that list in terms of, you need to look at it, because not all suppliers are the same. And you can't treat all suppliers are the same. You've got web developing suppliers, you've got Microsoft 365. I mean, there's no, they pose completely different risks.
Mm-hmm.
So now you need to come up with a classification scheme to look at your supply chain and understand, based on based on things like volume, the sensitivity that they process, store, transmit on your behalf, or connectivity to your systems, or any compliance requirements that you have. All right, so you need a classification scheme to apply to your supply chain that separates your suppliers in terms of their potential risk, based on how much data they process, store, transmit on your behalf, and how sensitive that data is to you. Let me give you an example. So say you've got a supplier that that's connected to your systems, or you've outsourced their processing, storing, and transmitting 500 personal sensitive records. All right, so you could call that low. But then you've got another group of suppliers who process, store, and transmit between 500 and 2,000 records of personal sensitive data or credit card data. You can call them medium. And then you've got another group of suppliers who process more than 2,000 records, and you could call them high. The point is, the scheme structure doesn't matter. What matters is that you've aligned that to your general risk appetite, and you understand, based on the impact of a breach of that supplier or that connection to your systems, what the potential impact would be. And it's within a classification scheme that you've identified. So now that's what confuses everybody, that you apply the same risk appetite to your supply chain as you do to yourself. Because obviously you should have done this for your own organization. Understand, the potential to lose 500 records or 5,000 records is the difference between a low threat and a high threat to us. And you would apply that same thinking to a classification scheme designed to identify who in your supply chain is the most possesses the biggest risk to you in terms of losing your data or impacting your systems. Okay, now you've got your list of suppliers, and you've got them triaged between low, medium, or high in terms of their potential, because of what they process, what they store, what they delivered for you. And now it's as easy to aligning a risk management framework to each classification level. To low-level suppliers, you can say, okay, why don't you start out, in terms of a risk management framework, I'd like you to meet or exceed cyber essentials. If you're a medium risk supplier, I want you to meet or exceed a boiled down version of ISO 27001. Or, of course, this is where compliance requirements come in and meet, because you're processing credit card data on our behalf, I need you to meet or exceed the PCI DSS or data protection or GDPR requirements, et cetera. But essentially, you just line up your control frameworks to your risk categories, that your suppliers who are categorized according to risk. And I see a minimum of 3 for me. Low, medium, or high should have each separate control frameworks. And of course, the higher the risk, the more restrictive the control framework that you're looking to apply to that specific supplier. Now, if that makes sense, if you understood me with all the coffee I drank today, what I've just described is a list of all your suppliers, and then triaging those into low, medium, high based on the classification scheme, and then aligning a control framework conducive to that potential risk. And right there, you've done quite a bit of work, because you're not applying one bar to your whole chain. And you wouldn't. It's not cost effective, and it's not applicable. And therefore, you're also prioritizing your workload. You're going to then start with your high risk suppliers and bring them in order as quick as you can, and then move your way through your medium down to your low. And many organizations I know of don't even manage their low, what they consider low risk suppliers. They don't have the resources, they don't have the time, and their focus is where it should be, on the high-risk suppliers.
Yeah.
But for me, those are the three steps that very quickly can provide clarity and prioritization of risks in a supply chain. You've got an aligned, applicable risk framework to a supplier. You're ensuring the appropriate controls are applied. That supplier is implementing those controls based on what they process, store, or transmit on your behalf, and then you manage. Identify, minimize, manage. You said it, Paul. That's it in those three steps.
So
Job done.
So here's what I think I heard, Richard. Define what a supplier is, identify your suppliers, classify your suppliers, and then align them to the controlled environment. I'm probably oversimplifying.
No, you're not.
Okay.
There's 2 points. First is, don't underestimate how important it is for definition, because that definition, believe it or not, is not an easy thing to get. Now, the second thing is, yes, that you're classifying them according to the potential impact on your organization if you had a breach. And I'm advocating you use the same risk appetite that you use for your own classification scheme. And then once you have that, you identify an applicable risk framework to that risk level.
Gotcha.
A smaller framework for low risk suppliers, a more stringent framework for high risk suppliers. And then suddenly it's square peg, square hole, and things start to fit. And you're not spending a lot of time and effort, trying to get a supplier who supplies you flowers, who's not connected to your systems, to implement ISO 27001.
Right.
You're starting to align things according to their risk requirements.
So Richard, who should do that? Should there be a supply chain management process in an organization? Is it the risk management process? Who's responsible for all of those steps?
Well, for me, it depends on the size of the organization, obviously. But a risk officer is responsible for the strategy of that. Now, he or she can't and shouldn't do that alone. You can't do that. And that's where we make our mistake. We come down, we sit down in a room, and we write up our classification scheme, but our list of suppliers isn't, we don't have an agreed definition for what is a supplier. We don't have a comprehensive list of those suppliers. We come up with a classification scheme and a control framework that just says everybody should be ISO compliant to connect to our systems, and then nobody actually enforces it because it doesn't make sense. So it can't happen in a vacuum. A risk, you need a strategy developed by a risk professional, and you need it agreed and executed by a procurement professional, and everybody, and all the stakeholders who have a piece of that. Legal, who make sure that the service level agreements are written correctly and enforced, and there's contract law enforced for repercussions of noncompliance. So it doesn't happen in a vacuum, and this is our problem. We write these things out, but we don't integrate them into the business processes.
I'm reading comments from the chat and guys to question in the chat. I'm thinking I won't get to all of them, but we will compile them between Richard and I so that we can maybe respond to them. One is in the chat. Well, that just disappeared on me. It's key to ensure, it's cut off here, that you embed these requirements upon signature of contract. So we're going to get into contract. That's a very good segue. According to, I'm going to throw another statistic at you, Richard. ISACA study also found that 84% of companies say there is not enough governance in place around their supply chains. So in my mind, part of that governance process should be contract. So let's talk about the contract process for a second. Can you explain the importance of contract management, contract termination, the decommissioning procedures and processes as it relates to supply chain?
Yeah, sure. It's again with the proviso, Paul, that obviously every organization has a different contracting process. The key is for risk managers to integrate themselves into those processes so that they understand well before. I heard that my antenna went up, because the time for identifying the security controls is not a time of contract. The time is during contract negotiation to allow the supplier to understand, ask questions. What do I need to do? Why do I need to do that? And of course, cost for that. It's not just out of nowhere to hand the procurement department, oh, by the way, make sure that these suppliers meet or exceed ISO 27001 or NIST or this or that. All right. So it's well up ahead of time is to be included in contract negotiation where a risk manager can sit down and understand this is the amount of data. This is the sensitivity of that data that you are going to process on our behalf, or this is the sensitivity of the connection of your connection to our systems. And the data that you can impact, the systems that you can impact or disrupt, and so and explain what the objective is of the controls that will be required for that relationship, and get the supplier to understand what the objective is of the controls, and not just give them the controls a contract, but discuss the purpose and the outcome and what is good evidence that the controls are working, and of course talk about alternatives. You can't do this, you can't do plan A. How about plan B or plan C or plan whatever? And so the critical time to introduce the risk manager is well upstream of is in contract is the RFP process is a place where every supplier can question and provide answers to what the risk the risk framework that's being applied to the supply chain. All right, that's first. First and foremost is upstream. Now downstream, and you pick up a good point here that there's two or three things that jump out at me, and that's critical to get into there. Is get the control framework, and that needs to go into the service level agreement, be understood by both parties, be negotiated by both parties. If compensating controls or alternatives need to be worked out, that needs to be done well prior to contract signature and contract award. All right, but some of the key things that are missing, Paul, is you brought up termination, contract termination is end of decommissioning, end of life. All right, it's a 2-year contract. The contract's over. What do we do? What are the security requirements for decommissioning that connection or that data? I cannot tell you how many people don't have a decommissioning clause that require the return or at a minimum the destruction of that data, and what sort of evidence is involved. For me, that's a clearly overlooked requirement in our process in terms of contracting. It's critical that we understand what happens at the end of the relationship. Do you go home? Do I go home? Do we forget about each other? Or are you going to give me my data back? Are you giving me all the backups of my data that you took? Do I get that back, or will I have you just destroy it? What happens to the connection, the VPN between your system and my system? Is it just terminated at your end, at my end? Is it tested? There's so many questions. And I was just thinking, it's funny. I told you I'm a director of a security company, our own risk consulting firm. We're ISO 27001, and one of the exercises that we did is we looked at all of our contracts where we have ongoing connectivity to our clients. And of course, Paul, we do pen testing and things, so we have very sensitive and very connections. And I think if I'm remembering correctly, we have 74 existing connections to clients. All right, and all 74 have security requirements in there, but only four had decommissioning. At the end of the contract, risk crew, this is what we need you to do. Now, that's where they've had the sophistication to understand and connect with a security consulting firm and understand these are the security requirements for your connection to our systems and your access to our data. But when the contract is over, only 4 out of 74 had thought to say, oh, by the way, I need you to verify that the connection is finished. I need you to sign an affidavit. I need to sign you to sign an affidavit that you didn't copy or make copies or alter or modify. That to me, in a nutshell, is what we're up against. And that's a security company. So if we're not even asking our security companies about decommissioning process for monitoring firewalls and things, what else are we missing?
Yeah, very good. So we're limited on time. I want to throw one more question at you, Richard. And for those of you that are in the chat, again, I think we got to one of your questions. I'm going to ask the system administrator to compile those questions, and we're going to try to get some responses to you, or you can come to the workshop in October. So one last question for you, Richard. More than half of our survey respondents said they expect supply chain issues to stay the same or worsen over the next 6 months. There's a lot going on in our world. You got the war between Russia and Ukraine. We're still trying to emerge from this pandemic. So, what is your outlook and what needs to be done to increase confidence in supply chains going forward? I think you kind of mentioned a lot of that already.
I did. I don't want to be pessimistic, but my outlook is not good, Paul.
Sure.
When people ask me, is the glass half full? Is it half empty? I say the glass is just bigger than it should be. It should be a
Right.
smaller glass. I try to look for a reasonable answer, but honestly, I've been doing this for over 30 years now, and uh, things move slowly. But so I'm a bit pessimistic, Paul. I think every day we're finding more and more products with 0-day vulnerabilities that allow access. Not good. Not good. What that tells me that solar winds wasn't an anomaly. It was evidence of the norm.
Yeah.
All right. This is a result of we do not practice security by design. So the products that we deploy on our systems to protect our systems in many cases have backdoors and holes in them. Okay. So that is now, oh hey, everybody seems to be just find that out now. So I don't see that that's going to change anytime soon. I'll say it again: solar winds wasn't an anomaly; it was just evidence of the norm.
Yeah.
We do not practice security by design; is not the norm, and so watch this space. And of course, cyber criminals now understood there's big cash to be made by ransomware in supply chains, and that doesn't go away overnight. When there's money to be made, money will be made until somebody stops that attack vector. And of course, as you brought up, nation states now understand the impact of disrupting a supply chain, whether that's Russia disrupting the Ukrainian supply chain, but we're seeing that everybody understands how fragile supply chains are, agricultural supply chains to power supply chains, and when people understand the potential vulnerabilities associated with supply chain, it's just like moths to a candle. It attracts a lot of bad actors.
Yeah.
And finally, of course, the growing risk of the increased dependency of Internet of Things in our supply chains.
Yeah.
So I get grumpy really fast, and I just don't think things are going to be better anytime soon.
Yeah.
What we need, for me, just one word: accountability.
Yeah.
Accountability would change everything. Accountability, accountability from our vendors. If we had a breach associated with Microsoft 365 and Microsoft 365 was accountable for that, change everything overnight. To me, accountability is the silver bullet for cybersecurity, and specifically in the supply chain, in our supply, dealing with our supply chain problem. It's one thing to get accountability through a service supplier who's supplying a service over a 2-year, 3, 5-year contract, where you have a contract. It's another thing entirely to get it from a product vendor, from a firewall vendor, from an anti-malware vendor, to who's giving us a product, and we're depending on that product, and we do not understand that product allows unauthorized access or connectivity to a third party, and that's not an accountability that's easily obtained. So two different sides, two different challenges there. Getting accountability from our suppliers, of course, that would just and paying for it, but getting accountability from our product vendors, like the solar winds of the world, who lay us to risk, and that to me is a separate challenge, and that isn't solved overnight.
Yeah. Yeah.
Vendor accountability wouldn't just change the supply chain; it would change our whole industry.
Change the whole industry. Wow. Wow. So much to be learned from that whole solar winds thing. So, hey, I think we're going to have to leave it there. Richard, it is always a pleasure. I will see you in Rome, Italy in October, and we're going to continue this discussion. Thank you for your time, and thank you for your continued support of ISACA. And everyone,
Thank you, Paul.
Great. Thank everyone. Thank you for joining us. And if you have any questions, again, put them in the chat and we'll get back to you. And we will conclude this discussion until next time. Everyone have a great day.